All right, you guys should see the seven seals on there. And by request, I am recording this. This is the final of the trumpets. And as I always joke, this is an hour-long presentation that I'm going to try and do in 59 minutes. So we've been through all this before. We'll go through quickly. We've done the seals. We're into the trumpets, and then, of course, the vials. And this is the time periods that we've covered off in Revelation. And for anybody that has not seen this before or is perhaps watching this on YouTube later on, is the fact that this is our belief is that Revelation is mostly history, and that for the most part, things have been fulfilled. We're going through one of the darkest periods in the history of the earth between the fifth and the sixth, known as the Dark Ages. We've got the papacy, we've got the rise of Islam, the end of the Roman empires. It becomes pagan Rome, becomes papal Rome, and the trumpets are being poured out. And so let's get going. And we remember from last time the significances of the fall of the different empires, and how the fall of the Western Empire covers off a lot of the first four, and then the fall of the Eastern Empire in 5 and 6. And the fifth trumpet, as we remember from last time, was the first woe, and that's from Revelation 8:13. And I beheld the angel in the midst of heaven saying with a loud voice, woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth by reason of the other voices of the trumpet of the three angels which are yet to sound. And the fifth angel sounded, and a star fell from heaven, etc. And one woe is past. And so we're going through the woes of the trumpets. And we remember the locusts and the scorpion in 5. And now we're going to see a little bit more about that in the rise of Islam in trumpet number 5. And now we are getting ready for trumpet number 6. And these visions represent the rise of Islam among the Arabs and the resulting Arabian or Saracen Empire and the Turkish Islamic Empire, which has succeeded and sprang from it. So these visions are more detailed and extended than the earlier trumpets. This may also reflect on the much longer duration in history. Both these trumpets affected not only nominal Christianity, but also the land of Israel and Jerusalem, which they occupied for around 1400 years. And it's the interaction of Rome and Islam with the church in Israel that makes both logical subjects of this grand prophecy. And so let's get into it. The sixth trumpet contains two visions. The first describes a great army of horsemen, and they destroy by the means of fire, smoke, and brimstone. And that was kind of new at this time. And it's basically the development of gunpowder, if you will, not guns necessarily, but you will see that all those fireworks that the Chinese had developed, they went, hey, look, if we put a lot of that, then that can make a cannon, and then that could blow up walls. And it was basically fire and brimstone, if you want to look at it, smoke, fire, and brimstone. And we'll see with that on these slides here. So let's go. Revelation 9, verse 12, as you can read there. In the past, there were two woes, more hereafter. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice of the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great rivers of Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay. And just before we get there, a little bit about let's see if there's anything here in my notes that I want to bring up. And they had the destruction of the four angels, and we have to go back to Revelation 7 to understand that and the destructive power there. But let's go on. The third part of men, and the vast number of the army, the horsemen, were around 200,000. And I heard the number of them, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat upon them, having the breastplates of fire, of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads on the horses were the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire, smoke, and brimstone. By these was the third part of men killed, by the fire, by the smoke, and by the brimstone which issued out of their mouth. For their power is in their mouth, and their tails were like unto serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not in their works of their hands, that they should worship the devils. We'll just pause there, and you can see all the symbolisms there, and we can see that the tails that were inflicted with the poison and the venom, the Islamic empires brought and left behind the false religion of the Quran and misery, both to speak of the smoke and the darkening of the powers, that is, and the truth. And both are reference against the idolaters, those who are not truly sealed servants of God. You know, the Ephesians 1:13 says the seal of the Spirit is your down payment. And if you have not the seal of Christ, if you have not the Spirit of Christ, you are none of his. But of course, as we know that Constantine opened up the doors earlier, as we see in Revelation, and that allowed the Christian message to spread. Unfortunately, it gets watered down, polluted, and they go, well, look at that. If we change all these idols into, and we'll just rename them Christian idols. The one particular one is the statue of Mary, which has a striking resemblance to Diana or Athena, or Venus, which is the goddess of fertility and of motherhood. And so when we see the mother of the sun god becomes the mother of God, the queen of heaven, there is striking similarities between that statue, which was something that was going on, the worship of these idols. And so this is the Reformation, and it's the warning against idolatry. And they've been told that this is the anti-idol Islamic empire. It's interesting to note that anyway, we'll go that idolatry was outlawed, but then later reinstated down the road. So the idols of gold, silver, brass, and stone, and wood would neither can see, nor hear, nor walk, neither repented they of their murderers or the sorcerers, nor their thefts. And we can see there's a cross reference there in Jeremiah that we'll see later that refers to that about the and again, I always marvel at Narveen and Shrujana's testimony about the idolaters in in India, and quite amazing that you'll go and you'll build an idol, you put it up, and next thing you know, it's customary to give treats to the idol before dinner or before you come or before you go, and it becomes a little game for the kids. And then it's just amazing how quickly a statue or something of wood or something of gold or brass or we note in Jeremiah, the Christmas tree suddenly gets ornated and people dance around it, worshiping it, and taken from the Teutonic pagan cult religions in Northern Europe. And it's just amazing how idolatry seems to creep into whatever society, and it doesn't take long before something comes up, and then next thing you know, it's an idol and people end up worshiping it, even though it has no power. So this is the whole thing, the barbarian invasions, as we talked about, in the Western Empire in 476, etc. And we heard about Constantine and all of that, but there's Constantinople right in the middle of everything, and that'll be coming plain in a bit. And the Justinian Eastern Empire gained control over some of the old area of the Western Empire at that time in Ravenna and Rome. You see in the lighter pink on the left and the sort of darker pink or mauve or magenta on the right there. And that's the Byzantines. And so you've got the Byzantines and the Sarkisian or Saracen empires in the AD 622 to AD 750 period of time. But of course, if you've got an empire, why not expand the borders? And we're going to see the happening that's going to come up. They broke into different factions at this time, and we see how we'll just go through some of the time periods here. And we see in 1005, the Caliphate of Baghdad invited the Turkish leader to become the protector, and he married the daughter of the Caliphate, and they become the official protector of Islam. And so Torgol Beg is his name, and after remaining in Baghdad for over a year, went out from Baghdad to subdue and conquer the area. Hey, cool, I got some power. Let's go conquer some lands. And we can see, oh, look at that. Well, we'll just take over everything up to the border of Constantinople in 1071. And the Turks started establishing their empire. You see the orange as it's growing. And they were opposite Constantinople, and the rest of Europe was getting concerned at this point. As I pointed out, the Crusades were launched against them in the Islamic caliphates. The point I always make, and you've heard it, I'll say it again, the Crusades were a defensive battle against what was going on with the Islamic people that were basically, you convert or we're going to behead you. And you join our caliphate, we will rape your women, destroy your cities, and if you don't, then you're dead. And so the nominal Christians and whoever was there just went, well, we got to do something. And so anybody that likes to back you into the corner and say, oh, well, you Christians in your crusades, well, let's get into the numbers. The 300 or so burned cities of the Islamic caliphates versus the 4 recorded times in history that maybe the Crusades went a little wonky, where some people, did some bad things and went a little overboard. So if the score on the board is 300-4, I would say that we definitely are on the right side of history, and you should have no problem defending that in any thing where somebody says, oh, you Christians and you Crusades. Defensive battle. If that had not happened, the Islamic Caliphate would have taken over Vienna, Paris, and that was really a big turning point. And it only slowed them down. And not only to mention that, but of course we've got Genghis Khan that started coming in from the east as well, and so he's sweeping through the land. And by 1300, the remainder of the empire under Asia Minor had come under Mongol domination. So the Eastern Roman Empire had regained part of the former territory, but as of the last generation, the Turks came under the Mongol influence and seemed to be expiring. Another family of Turks named the Orthmen, who bordered on the Eastern Empire, arose and grew into an even more powerful empire, and they would extend all the way until World War I, 1917, 18, in around that period of time. And that's covered under the 6th vial, if you're keeping track at home. So the Ottomans quickly retook parts of the Eastern Roman Empire. And as I mentioned before, Genghis Khan and the Khans, they kind of took over Europe, and then they went, we better just consolidate things back in China. They had their problems to deal with, and so they pulled out. And of course, around this time, we start seeing bubonic plague and other things sprout up that happened. So by AD 1451, the Ottoman Turk had taken virtually all of the Eastern Roman Empire, except for little Constantinople. And it stood out by itself, and it was a prize that the Turks sincerely wanted. And so a new sultan decided to devote his efforts and considerable resources to taking of the city. And there's what Constantinople looks like, the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea. And basically that is the dividing point between Europe and Asia. And we'll just go through this kind of quickly here. And you see the chaos had died down, and we get the siege in 1453, and it took 53 days. And we'll go through the quotes here kind of quickly. If you're watching on the video at home, feel free to pause and read these in detail if you like. And so that was a victory that would be something significant. So it'd be another 200 years before the advancement of the Ottomans into Europe. As it says in 1683, there they are at the gates of Vienna. So the Crusades slowed them down, maybe, but the Islamic Caliphate, they weren't going to stop. They believed they were doing the right thing by God, and they were going to continue through. And it was a woe. They destroyed, they killed, they pillaged, and among all the death and destruction came the various black deaths of Europe, the plagues that happened. And literally at that time, 1/3 of the world died. So you've got the different quotes there about that. So the Turk replaced the word Saritian, and it was a generic term for Muslim. So we see that. So note here that as the horsemen replaced the locusts in the fifth and the sixth trumpets, yet there was a unifying motivation behind both. Islam, the very names of Turk and Saritian are synonymous with Muslim, and the first replaced the second as a cruel woe. Okay, situation just before the taking of Constantinople, right there, and it expanded the Ottoman Empire, expanded, growing, and look at that, taking all of that down into Jerusalem in 1520, and then further expansion in 1566, taking over around the Euphrates once again, and so the high tide of the Ottoman Empire and the lines of the final attempt were to take Vienna. And of course, right now, the Russian Empire was starting to take note of this. And you get the Austrian Empire. And in 1683 was the turning of the tide. And some people said, we got to do something about this. They're on a roll here. So here we begin to look at some of the symbols of these different things. The horsemen of 200,000, and we can see that the power would arise from the Euphrates, and the locusts, as we talked about, the four angels. And the Turks were famous for the myriads of horsemen in the period occupied the Turkish Empire. So the great number here can be understood as symbolizing the many generations of the Turkish horsemen throughout the 900 years of their empire, rather than just a single army. And you can read the quotes there. So the Turks who began to find their way into the forces of the caliphates were originally from the areas around the Caspian Sea. They were famous for their innumerable hordes of cavalry. And you can see that quote in 1748, 400,000 soldiers in the army. As we said, prophecy written, and a secular writer and other people that wrote about these things in the history books in 1748 seem to complete that. And we'll go through these quotes kind of quickly here. Yeah, and for the sake of time, we'll just go through this kind of quickly here. For anybody that wants more details, we're happy to share that with you. And some of the regular cavalry there, and the great bodies, and the light horsemen. The Akanzi were a light horse, and the children were collected as tribute. Quite amazing. And there you go. And the heads were as lions. And there's another quote that uses the lion description for the Muslims, lion-like. The Satan is a roaring lion, and so there you go. And there's some poems and other things here that confirm it. Lots of detail here, and the opinions of the Chinese and their relations. Take a look at this in the time of the rise of the Turkish Empire, and you get these histories here. So now, what about the third part of men killed by fire, smoke, and brimstone? So the historical feature of the taking of Constantinople was the use of a new technology of cannons and gunpowder. So the picture shows Mehmet II and his newly founded cannon, and he's marching on Constantinople for the siege. Said, hey, all this stuff that we got from China, let's put it to good use here. Forget the ice cream and the pasta. the gunpowder looks like it's got a much better staying power. So anyway, so the geographical situation was that it was very well protected, Constantinople. And we can see the city. There's the city of Constantinople. And then it had massive walls and very, very well defended. And the side and the top of the walls, it was ready to go. But the chemists in China, they said that if you take saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, and you put a spark to it, wow, explosion. And so that's the lead up to Gibbon's account of Constantinople, was the discovery of gunpowder, and basically brimstone is sulfur. Quite interesting. And there's yellow volcanic ash there in that picture. And here's some of the cannons from the Turkish bombardments. And here's a depiction of the siege of Constantinople. And there's the cannons right there, all protected, being loaded up and blown away as they just kept bombarding the city. And so it was an important and visible object in historical times. We can see how things have advanced in these weapons of warfare. 330 bullets at one time. And here's some more pictures, the lines in the galleries of the Ottoman artillery thundering on all sides as they are exploding with the fire and brimstone, as written there. And he brought the 80 vessels overland to the Golden Horn Inlet so that they could have them ready to go. And his vessels in the inlet allowed him to use his cannons on the weaker sea walls and launch cannons from the sea. So the length the Muslims placed on their cannons in effectual positions, they threw up their entrenchments. And this quote is from the 1500s. You can see the imagery of the fiery jaws smoke extinguishing the infidels. That was their goal. You know, if you're not going to convert, we are going to kill you. And we can see the rest of the quote there, the unfortunate infidels. And so in their mind, they were doing it. There's some pictures there, as we mentioned, that they had the breastplates as listed there. And the brimstone is the cannons. And this quote here is about the Turkish costume and all the different things that they have. And they wear the red, the blue, and the yellow, and the purple sulfur colors as well. And their tails were like unto serpents, and they had heads with them to hurt. So the locusts had the tails like scorpions. And so the Turkish had their horsemen, and they were like serpents. Both they had tails to inflict through the poison and venom. And the Islamic Empire brought and left behind the false religion, the false prophet of the Quran and misery. They did not simply conquer, but infected with poison the false teachings. Both Jesus and John the Baptist called the false teachers of their time the offspring of serpents. You vipers brood, is what John the Baptist said in Matthew. The offspring of the devil, as we mentioned on Sunday. The lawyers and Pharisees, sons of the dogs that murdered the prophets, etc. So the vision and the rise of Islam in the fifth trumpet connects directly and is associated with the angel of the bottomless pit. It also described the star falling, which was the end of the Roman Empire. And, you know, as it says in Luke 10, I beheld Satan falling as lightning from heaven. Behold, I give upon you power to tread on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. And we're promised that, you know, pick up snakes, drink any deadly poison and not be harmed. So if we are praying, if we are walking in the Spirit, and this is the key thing to take away, that any of these false doctrines, false teachings, the church of woke that is going around the world right now will not poison us. And we can see the truth, and the truth will make us free. And we can continue on worshiping God in spirit and in truth. And we can see, again, more things of serpents and venom from the historians there. And we can see the history there, of the Turkish history, a little bit about this written in the Edinburgh Encyclopedia. Now, about the prepared for an hour a day, a month, a year, and to slay a third part of man, we'll just finish off on this here, and then we'll leave it at that. So we take a look that there's a 400-year time period from the beginning of the empire to when the Turks finally conquered the city, and the remnant and the remain of the Eastern Roman Empire with it. So you can take a look at the quote of the there's a quote that I could read out. I will skip that for the sake of time. But in symbolic, an hour is 12 hours in a day, or 1/12 of a year, which equals 30 days. A day for a year is 1 year. A month is 30 days, which is 30 years. So whenever you see that in prophecy, we see that. So we see that a month in other prophecies, 30 days, 1,260 days, 42 months, 3.5 times, which equates 30 years. So the hour is more difficult. Jews divided their day from dawn to sunset into 12 hours, regardless of the season. Consequently, the hours in the winter were shorter than in the summer. So the night was simply divided into 3 or 4 watches. And, there's 12 hours in a day is what Christ was saying. Somebody might read that quote and go, oh, wait a second, there's 24 hours in a day. Well, in Christ's time, they talk about a 12-hour day is what was happening. So if we continue on, then a year is 360 days, 391 years, and 30 days is what we're talking about in the symbolic prophecy time. That's times and a half at the 7 times punishment, which is 2,300 days, 1,290 days, 1,335 days, 5 months. That's the 70 weeks that we see quite often talked about in Daniel's time. And I'm going through this really quickly, I realize, for the sake of time, but there is the one thing I wanted you to have confidence with is that the Bible is the word of God, and if it's written, it is going to happen. And so, another choice might be to take a look at 396 years, 118 days, and that's Daniel's prophecy as well in Daniel 9:2. In the year of his reign, it talks about the 70 years before the destruction and desolations of Jerusalem. And if we take a look at Torobeg departs Baghdad in 1057 and the fall of Constantinople in 1453. And we take a look at that, and there's the first day of the siege and the 40th day of the siege, and there is the days right there. The 29th of May is the 53rd day of the siege on the 29th of May. And so the transfer of the power was a siege of 40 days, and the fate of Constantinople could no longer be averted. And after the siege, the fate could no longer be averted. Now, an interesting thing was that during the siege, they repented not and worshiped idols. You cannot see, nor hear, nor walk. And so what we have there is, look at that. There's the idol of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who we always say that Mary was a very important person, wonderful sister, spoke in tongues on the day of Pentecost in the upper room with the other disciples, receiving the Holy Spirit. Wonderful sister, wonderful, faithful woman that had the privilege of bearing the Son of God. And it was just interesting when we read about that in the chapter 9, verses 20 and 21, that they decided that they were going to take the virgin around the city as the protector of the city. Right. I was talking to somebody, I think Mexico, the patron of Mexico is our Lady Mary. And so, people often parade around with statues of Mary. Miguel and Magdalena will tell you that they've got all these pictures of Mary, and there she is with Jesus. Well, actually, that symbolism is the same imagery of Diana, the Greek goddess. And we can see how the Roman Catholic Church incorporated that into the nominal Christian faith. So they figured that this icon of Mary was going to protect them against the Arab sieges. So they figured that this was it. We'll carry, there we are. May 25th was the icon shrine just before the fall on the 29th of May. So let's put it on a wooden pallet. Let's lift it on the shoulders, hold it up high in the streets and hold our tradition, march this around. And over, the citizens repeated the cry for the psychic protection. Save us, Mary. And of course, they're praying to a false idol. And so the processions went around. It was terrible and destructive. It meant nothing. And, they took it was in mud. And there's the quote in Jeremiah, for the customs of the people are vain. You cut a tree down from the forest. It's the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it out with silver and gold. Some people do that at Christmas. I realize that it's kind of a tradition and people still do it, but it comes from the pagan Teutonic thing where you get a tree, you deck it out in silver and gold, you put nails on it and it doesn't move, and then you start worshiping it. And or you make idols out of it and you carve statues, and then they don't do anything. They have no power at all to do anything. What's important is to worship God in spirit and in truth. And that is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God, keep his commandments, and understand that it's not Mary, it's not a rosary, a cross around your neck, a lucky 4-leaf clover, or something that you have by ritual, that if whatever superstitions we have, what we need to understand is it's the power of God and the Holy Spirit that gives us the ability to lay hands on the sick and have them recover, to pray with people, see them be baptized, to spread the gospel, the good news, to know that no deadly poison, no snake will harm us. And with that, we will conclude. And all the people said, amen.